I want to come back to the application question about Megan and fasting. And this is just one aspect, what happens to your energy while fasting. And there's many other really dangerous consequences of a complete fast, mainly that you don't get the essential nutrients that your body needs. But here we're going to focus on the energy and look into what the symptoms that she experiences, how we can explain those. Let's first review where energy is stored in our bodies, from the least stable to the most stable. It's the electrochemical gradient, ATP, glucose in your cells in the bloodstream, as well as in your liver, and then glycogen in muscles and the liver again, and triglycerides in adipose tissue. In a 70-kilogram adult male, there's only a small fraction of the energy that is stored in carbohydrates, about 1,200 calories. That's not a lot. You eat more in a day, probably. 135 calories are stored in fat, and that is about 14 kilograms of fat, and 54,000 calories are stored in proteins. So right after a meal, we already know what happens because you did that worksheet. Blood glucose goes up. Oops. Insulin first goes up, and then you are spending energy. Your blood glucose level slowly goes down because the glucose is consumed or converted to glycogen. When your blood is low in glucose, glucagon is produced and glycogen is converted to glucose released into the bloodstream. That lasts for, about 24 hours. Remember, only 1,200 calories. Once glycogen is used up, we're getting into problem because your brain and your red blood cells need glucose. They cannot deal with any other source of fuel. And glucose is not normally obtained from fat fast enough and enough for making up for fasting. So what happens right after your last meal 24 hours later is that proteins start to be broken down. That's very dangerous for your body because proteins have all these many functions, and you also don't want to have muscle wasting. The liver can produce glucose from fat and proteins and so forth, but it doesn't do that at a high level. You might stop this video and study this figure in your own time. And because it is so dangerous to use protein as a source of fuel, the brain switches to using ketones as fuel. And the ketones are derived, as you can see in the figure here on the right, from fat. But it comes as a price. It saves the proteins, but it acidifies the blood. And it has a positive effect, and that is that it suppresses the appetite, which is good when you're fasting. You might have been on a fast and know that the first days are really difficult, you're very hungry, and then that hunger goes away, and that is partly the consequence of this ketosis. And another thing happens, and that is that the body tries to survive by slowing its metabolism. Look at this clicker question and see whether you can figure it out. So A must be the correct answer, even though we didn't talk about thyroid hormone levels yet, because BMR, remember, with basal metabolic rate, is not of a person who moves. So not moving cannot be responsible for this change. And then lastly, let's come back to the symptoms of Megan. Muscle wasting, that is because the body uses proteins as fuel. Lowered body temperature, that's the slower metabolism. And reduced resistance to disease, same thing. The body starts to really conserve energy. And that is an explanation why after several days of fasting, your hunger goes down, but so does the speed with which you lose weight.